Hello, and welcome to a presentation about stomach cancer research funding opportunities through the Department of Defense's Peer Review Cancer Research Program. Next slide, please. I am Camille Banta, and I serve as the Policy and Advocacy Consultant for Debbie's Dream Foundation, Curing Stomach Cancer, which is pleased to bring this timely webinar to you all in partnership with the American Gastroenterological Association, the American College of Gastroenterology, and the American Society for Gastrointestinal Endoscopy. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available along with the slides after today. Also, there will be an opportunity for your questions to be answered at the end of this presentation. So please submit your questions at any time through the question or the chat function in the GoToWebinar control panel. Next slide. So the objectives of today's webinar are to help researchers recognize the role of the Peer Review Cancer Research Program in funding stomach cancer research and to learn about the Peer Review Cancer Research Program funding opportunities and strategies for funding success. Next slide, please. And in a moment, you'll be hearing from Julia Huiberts, who is the program manager for the Peer Review Cancer Research Program. But first, I want to say a few words about advocacy efforts to ensure continued funding for stomach cancer through this program. Next slide, please. In 2014, Debbie's Dream Foundation approached members of Congress about including stomach cancer in the Peer Review Cancer Research Program. Advocates made the case for stomach cancer's inclusion, including military relevance, as well as the historic lack of funding for this deadly cancer. That year, Congress included stomach cancer in the program for the first time, and since then, stomach cancer has remained in the program due to ongoing advocacy efforts, leading to extraordinary opportunity for stomach cancer researchers in this historically under-researched cancer. Next slide. This February, roughly 150 stomach cancer advocates participated in more than 200 meetings with members of Congress and staff as part of the 12th annual Debbie's Dream Foundation Curing Stomach Cancers Advocacy Day. And in those meetings, the request was made to include stomach cancer again in the program for fiscal year 2025. Next slide. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Julia Huiberts. Ms. Huiberts serves, as I said, as the program manager for the Peer Review Cancer Research Program, and in which capacity she is responsible for administering the program's life cycle, which includes annual review of the program's vision and mission, development and release of funding opportunities, oversight of the two-tier review of applications, and overall program coordination and evaluation. Ms. Huiberts earned her MS in biology from the University of Texas and has served with the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program organization for 17 years and transitioned into her current role with the Peer Review Cancer Research Program about a year ago. Ms. Huiberts has been involved extensively with outreach and collaboration with stakeholders in the government, the Department of Defense, academia, industry, and advocacy organizations, as demonstrated by her participation in today's webinar. It is now my privilege to turn the webinar over to Ms. Huiberts.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. I am the program manager for the PRCRP, as mentioned, and I'm going to shorthand it as PRCRP for hopefully the rest of the presentation. So first slide. So I'm just going to spend a couple minutes giving you some background information on the CDMRP that is germane to successfully applying for funds through the PRCRP. So the WHO on this graphic says CDMRP was started by Congress, but it was the actions of patient advocates that spurred Congress to create the CDMRP. Breast cancer advocates who were dissatisfied with the state of disease research embarked on a grassroots effort, visiting members of Congress to petition for disease-specific research funds. Once they'd successfully won those funds, They needed a federal partner to manage them, but they had an incontrovertible condition that advocates would have a seat at the table and a say in how those funds were spent. They found federal agencies in DC willing to manage the funds, but only using existing processes, which didn't include advocate participation. So the advocates left DC and visited the Army Medical Command about 45 minutes outside the Beltway and pitched their requirements to the commanding general, who told them the U.S. Army could do whatever was asked of it. And that's how these research funds ended up in the Department of Defense Appropriations Bill and under the auspices of the U.S. Army. Today, advocates continue to participate in the on programmatic panels, review panels with clinician and scientist partners, setting program goals and making funding decisions. The what is funding innovative and impactful research. At the same time, advocates were speaking to Congress. They were asking researchers what needs weren't being met with current funding. Researchers said, in order to compete for funds, we need to have a ton of preliminary data. That traps us on a specific research path. We can't compete for funds for new, unproven, innovative research. So those first programmatic panels created a mechanism called the Idea Award, which is designed to fund high-risk, potentially high-reward, proof-of-principle research. Funding ideas through mechanisms like the Idea Award is a long-standing hallmark of CDMRP. So where our funding is available globally, we fund research in countries around the world. We fund academia, we fund industry. We really have a reach across the globe with our funding. How is through our two-tiered review process, which I'll talk about later in this presentation. It's important to consider when you apply for CDMRP funds. And the why is to perform the type of research that advocates have fought for, research focused on urgent issues for patients. Next slide, please. So this is the CDMRP vision, which is to transform healthcare through innovative and impactful research. And we do that by responsibly managing collaborative research that discovers, develops, and delivers healthcare solutions for service members, their families, veterans, and the American public. Next slide, please. The CDMRP is what's called a single year appropriation. That means every year advocates return to Capitol Hill to discuss their priorities with members of Congress and secure funding for these programs. So in the last 30 years, we've grown quite a bit. And for fiscal year 2024, we have 35 disease-specific programs and received over a little over 1.5 billion in funding. Next slide, please. The PRCRP was established in fiscal year 2009 with an appropriation of $16 million and 4 topic areas directed by Congress. One of those topic areas, for fiscal year 24, we received $130 million and 18 topic areas. So we've grown quite a bit since our inception. PRCRP has spent about $915 million and funded over 1,000 awards and 35 unique topic areas. Our vision is to advance mission readiness of U.S. military members affected by cancer. All of CDMRP programs focus on military members. We have a special ask from Congress to make sure all of our research will touch mission readiness. We do this by successfully promoting high-impact research in cancer prevention, detection, treatment, quality of life, and survivorship for service members, their families, veterans, and the American public. Next slide, please. These are our fiscal year 24 topic areas. You'll note some of our topic areas are specific cancer types. Some are groups of cancers, like blood cancer. Some are areas of cancer research, such as metastatic cancers. Our topics sometimes come and go. We have many that have been stably present for many years, nearly the entire history of the program for some. Applications to the PRCRP are required to address one of these topic areas. When you apply to the program, you have an opportunity to select up to 2 topic areas. So if you are applying to research, for example, pediatric leukemia, you can select both blood cancers and the pediatric, adolescent, and young adult cancer topics. Anytime we have applicants who can select 2 topic areas, we ask them to do so. In addition, our congressional language indicates we cannot fund research into breast, kidney, lung, ovarian, pancreatic, prostate, or rare cancers, or glioblastoma or melanoma. This is because these cancers have their own funding through standalone programs at the CDMRP. In fact, a handful of those were once topic areas under the PRCRP before they got their own funding. This language restricting certain cancer types becomes important for topic areas like metastatic cancers. Even when applying for funding under this topic area, those studies cannot include any of the cancers on that restricted list. This is an error we see yearly. It's the subject of a lot of inquiry, so I want to be sure to emphasize that those restricted cancers must not be included in any way in any application to the PRCRP. The exception you'll see right there at the bottom is the Rare Cancers Research Program. Because some of our cancer topics or cancer subtopics, cancer subtypes of those topics are rare by definition, those rare cancer types that fall under our topic areas are accepted from that restriction. And lastly, our direction from Congress indicates, again, as I mentioned, that research to the PRCRP must be relevant to service members, veterans, and their families. Next slide, please. Next slide. Oh, there's one missing there. Sorry. It must be lagging on my screen. I need the previous slide. There we go. I'm sorry. So in response to congressional language that emphasizes the relevance of PRCRP research to service members, we created 2 military health focus areas that are here in blue text. All submissions are required to choose one of these focus areas during the application process. The first is environmental and or occupational exposure risk factors associated with cancer. You know, very simply, by the nature of their duties and their deployments, service members have greater exposure to risk factors like ionizing radiation, chemical or infectious agents than, you know, the average member of the American public. The second area is mission readiness and gaps in cancer research. A service member who has cancer has to be taken off active duty for treatment. Toxic cancer treatments can delay or prevent a service member from returning to duty. In addition, when a family member has cancer, a service member may be taken off duty to be a caregiver, or they may simply be anxious and distracted because of the family member in cancer treatment. All of these are examples of how cancer can impact mission readiness. Addressing the gaps in cancer research, improving cancer prevention, care, and survivorship will positively impact mission readiness. Next slide, please. So this slide, it looks like it got a little scrambled in the transmission process here. So we have 17 overarching challenges, and they are collected under 5 categories. I wasn't going to read them anyway. They're available in every funding announcement. But do let me know, when you're crafting your application, please, you should be addressing one of the 17 individual challenges and not just a challenge category. Next slide, please. So our 2-tier review process. The CDMRP and PRCRP use a 2-tier review system where the first tier review is scientific peer review. Applications in the first tier review, they're compared to a gold standard to determine scientific merit. A summary statement of the comments and scores from peer review is provided to second tier programmatic review. Applications with the most meritorious peer review scores are compared, and they're selected based on programmatic relevance. CDMRP does not use a pay line. Programmatic review, again, it's a comparative process among high-scoring projects. It's not uncommon at programmatic review to have an application with greater relative programmatic relevance be recommended for funding over another one that might have had a higher peer review score. So those funding decisions are made based on how well the application will meet goals the program has set for that year. It's important in your application that you are addressing the impact of your research on meeting programmatic goals. Next slide, please. So I've grayed out the second bullet here because the PRCRP is a congressional special interest program, and the second bullet is about the president's budget. The importance of that is, I mentioned already, CSI funds are determined annually. This is why advocates visit Congress every year to get this funding, and that we never have a guarantee that any of our programs will be renewed. For this reason, when you submit a multi-year budget, it's fully obligated, fully funded up front when you receive an award from us. So one advantage to applying to our program is that there's no risk from year to year that your budget can be cut. Next slide, please. This is an overview of the funding opportunities being offered by the PRCRP this year. I've mapped it out along a research continuum, so you can see we are offering funding for early ideas, mature research, clinical and translational research, and in addition, we're offering funding for collaborative team science, an initiative I'll discuss when we get to the slides about those mechanisms. And you'll note there's a little cross at the end of the bullets about some of those mechanisms. We have 4 mechanisms that are indicated there with a little cross, 4 that can fund clinical trials. Next slide, please. So I'm presenting the IDEA and Impact Award together because it's these mechanisms, they're the 2 where we most often hear reviewers say that the research is programmatically inappropriate for the mechanism. For our IDEA award, it has a maximum direct cost of $400K and a maximum period of performance of 2 years. You can submit an application for less than 2 years that asks for the full amount. You can submit an application for 2 years that asks for less than $400K. Those are just the maximums. So eligibility is faculty level appointment or equivalent. This is the award that supports those basic research, innovative, untested, high risk, potentially high reward, promising ideas. Preliminary data is discouraged. We would expect that an early stage idea like this would not have a lot of preliminary data. Applicants can only be named as PI on one IDEA award. Clinical trials are not allowed under the IDEA award, and it requires a 1-page pre-application followed by invitation to submit a full application. So the CDMRP has 2 modes of pre-application. One that's merely a letter of intent that we use only for planning purposes, and then one where a submitted pre-application is reviewed and an invite, not invite for full application determination is made. I'll compare these a bit when I show you a graphic of the application cycle, but for the IDEA and the impact, they are that second type, and a full application submitted without an invitation will be administratively rejected. For our impact award, this is our mature research award. It's direct cost of $1 million for up to 3 years. Independent investigators at or above the level of assistant professor are eligible. This supports mature research focused on critical scientific and clinical issues that, if successful, have the potential to make a near-term major impact for patients. Because this is mature research, we naturally anticipate that there'll be some robust preliminary data. And clinical trials are allowed under the Impact Award. And again, it's one of those pre-applications type where you submit and you wait for an invitation to submit a full application. Next slide. This is the Advancing Cancer Care Clinical Trial Award, which we could just call the Clinical Trial Award. So I'm moving into our clinical and translational mechanisms. This award is being offered only for the second time, as it was brand new last year. It has direct costs of $3 million for a maximum period of performance of 4 years. You must have a faculty level appointment or equivalent. Supportive preclinical data is required. No animal work is allowed under the Clinical Trial Award. You have to come in with a clinical trial that is got everything it needs and it's ready to go. You may evaluate pharmacological agents, devices, clinical guidance, emerging approaches and technology, and projects can range from small pilot phase 0 trials to large phase 3 efficacy trials. The application has to demonstrate access to a suitable patient population, and that comes into play with this program because of our emphasis on military. Sometimes our PIs want to reach out to military active duty or to the VA. Those require there's some very specific requirements to use those populations. So you want to make sure that you're working early on that if you want to use one of those patient populations. Again, make sure the clinical trial you're submitting is developed to the point to achieve this milestone of being open and recruiting within 12 months. There will be a limitation on the funding for the first 12 months. If you haven't met the requirements for the first year of the award, we can hold additional funding beyond that first year of funding. Again, this is a pre-application that will be screened for an invite, not invite determination. And I wanted to mention the IDEA Award and the Impact Award. We actually anticipate we're going to have those out in the next couple weeks. The Clinical Trial Award, that's going to be close to mid-June. Next slide, please. So our Patient WellBeing and Survivorship Award, this is another one that's going to be out in the next couple weeks. Direct cost of $1 million for maximum period of performance of 3 years. Independent investigators at or above the level of assistant professor. The important thing here is only 8 of the 17 overarching challenges are eligible to be submitted under this award. And those are the ones that are in the disparities and the patient well-being and survivorship categories. These studies should support preservation of physical function, quality of life, symptom management, resilience, relief from neurocognitive deficits, support for psychosocial issues. Your application must demonstrate how the research will transform outcomes for one of the fiscal year topic areas and patients for that disease. Basic laboratory studies are not appropriate for this mechanism. Pilot clinical trials are allowed. This mechanism only has a letter of intent for planning purposes. And again, I'll talk about those timelines for those different pre-applications a little later. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk just quickly about our Convergent Science initiative. So we have 3 independent PRCRP mechanisms focused on team science, specifically convergent science. So the definition of convergent science is there at the top. It's basically bringing together multiple specialties and scientific disciplines to address a problem. We have 2 big initiatives related to convergent science that we're soliciting for this fiscal year. And our first is the Convergent Science Virtual Cancer Center, or the VCC. This is intended to promote convergent science in a career development environment. So the VCC is led by a director and a deputy director who are responsible for developing and overseeing this multidisciplinary, multi-institutional virtual research community capable of proposing convergent solutions to our topic areas. The other members of the VCC are our scholars, our early career independent investigators interested in cancer research and professional development in convergent science methods. Both of the mechanisms that are used to populate the VCC are being offered this year, the VCC Director Award and the Career Development Award Scholar option. Our second initiative is the Convergent Science Consortium Award. This is our first ever award of this magnitude. It's $20 million in direct cost. It will be available to support 3 research sites, including one of those sites as a coordinating center of the consortium. So I'll get into those in a bit more detail on the following slides. Next slide, please. So the VCC Director Award, it was first offered in fiscal year 2020, and we'll see that first effort complete its period of performance next September. This iteration of the Director's Award is not necessarily a continuation of the existing VCC. It's being openly competed, and the previous directors are required to apply to the opportunity with all other comers. Its direct costs are $1.75 million. In this case, for that period of performance of 4 years, we do expect the period of performance to be that the entire 4-year period. Eligibility is level of associate professor or equivalent. This award brings together 2 established investigators to interrogate commonalities of cancer with the scholars, which again are recruited under that separate mechanism. The director and the deputy director have to be from different cancer disciplines. They have to be from different institutions. They have to have current and past cancer funding, publications about cancer in high impact journals. They have to have mentorship and convergent science experience. They provide intensive mentoring and national networking to these junior faculty scholars in a collaborative research and career development environment. We do require that they host at least 1 annual workshop and that they provide these Subawards to collaborating scholars to encourage multidisciplinary convergent collaborative research within that cohort. Applications to this may require a live virtual presentation to this. The way that would work is for our scientific peer review would send all of the applications up, all of the invited applications, I should say, up to programmatic review. Programmatic review may winnow these down to the top competitors, and then we would have those applicants come in and do a require virtual presentation. So again, this is also another mechanism that is going to involve an invitation to submit. And I'm sorry, I just forgot again, because we're just getting these deadlines. The scholar option for the VCC is going to be, I'm sorry, the Virtual Cancer Center Director Award is going to be available. It's going to be one of those ones that's available in June. So next slide, please. So our Career Development Award, our scholar option, this one is going to be available in the next 2 weeks. It's a direct cost of $800,000 over 4 years. And again, that entire period of performance, you're expected to do the whole 4 years. Early career researchers or physician scientists within 7 years of completion of their terminal degree at application deadline are available. This can exclude time spent in residency or clinical training or on some kind of family medical leave. Postdoctoral fellowships are not excluded. Postdocs are not eligible to apply for this award. The scholar should be on a tenure track or equivalent position and have independent laboratory space. They must name an experienced cancer researcher as a career guide or a mentor, essentially. And they have to have a career development plan that clearly articulates a strategy for acquiring the necessary skills, becoming competent, and further independence. Again, this requires participation in the PRCRP Convergent Science Virtual Cancer Center. Preliminary data are not required. Clinical trials are not allowed. And this is a letter of intent only mechanism. Next slide, please. The Convergent Science Cancer Consortium Award. As I mentioned, this is a first for us. It's $20 million in direct costs in a 4-year period of performance. Eligibility is at the level of associate professor or equivalent. It will support a coordinating center that also serves as a research site. In addition to additional research sites, these all must be at separate organizations and the 3 research projects minimum. The PI is of the award of the application is the coordinating cancer center director. They must contribute a minimum of 10% level of effort to the project, and the PI or a co-I must demonstrate experience in convergent science theory. The coordinating center is also the planning nexus and the providing support services like administrative, operational, or data management support. PIs and co-Is should be from different disciplines and different cancers. Research projects should be based on the principles of convergent science and address at least 3 different FY24 PRCRP topic areas. So those need to be the actual individual topic areas. So it couldn't be, for example, pediatric brain tumors and then have 3 types of tumors. You know, it has to be stomach cancer, esophageal cancer. It has to be those high-level topic areas. This application too may require a live virtual presentation. The same thing. There'll be a peer review screening, there'll be a programmatic review screening, and the ones that are most competitive will be asked to give a virtual live presentation before a decision will be made or a recommendation will be made. This will have a 3-page pre-application that'll be followed by an invitation to submit a full application. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to get into now some of the nuts and bolts of applying. You could be notified of our funding opportunities by signing up for our listserv through the CDMRP website or the Electronic Biomedical Research Application Portfolio website, the EBRAP website as we call it. This is where you start your submission process with your pre-application, and where, if you're funded by the program, you'll submit your documentation for award negotiations and regulatory reporting. You can also go to grants.gov and put in that CFDA number to see all of our open funding opportunities. And when you subscribe to our listserv, you are able to limit, like you just want to see cancer programs, you don't want to see our injury programs, so you can personalize those notifications that you receive. Next slide. So I like to put this right kind of at the front when I start talking about, success in applying. This is the single most important tip. So we hold a yearly vision setting meeting where we review the research landscape and set programmatic goals. And the first order of business after that meeting is to compose our funding opportunities that are built upon those discussions and customized to those goals. Our program announcements are windows into exactly what will be desired for funding. So you need to make sure you're reading that announcement carefully. Next slide, please. So I want to take a quick look at our funding cycle. We've already conducted our yearly vision setting, so the next steps are circled in red here. As I mentioned, we are drafting our funding opportunities for release in May and June. So I'll just go over one more time. We expect in the next couple weeks to have the idea, the impact, the CDA Scholar, and the Patient Wellbeing and Survivorship Award. In mid-June, we will have the Director, the Consortium, and the Clinical Trial Awards coming out. The first deadline to be met is pre-application receipt, right? So whether the pre-app is a letter of intent or letter of intent only, or a pre-application that will be screened for invitation, you cannot skip the pre-application step. If you're applying to a letter of intent only mechanism, the pre-app deadline will precede the application deadline by just a couple of weeks. So we anticipate from release of a program announcement to full app receipt, 7 to 8 weeks. In that time period. So your pre-application receipt will happen between around 5 to 6 weeks after the funding mechanism is released. If you're applying to an invitation-only mechanism, you have your pre-application deadline, and then it'll take 3 to 5 weeks to make an invite determination. If you receive an invitation letter, then you'll have about 6 to 8 weeks after you receive your invitation to submit your full application. Next slide, please. So our strategies for success, I'm just going to emphasize a few things here. So relevance, again, read the announcement, make sure you're addressing the goals of the program in your application. Again, those ultimate funding recommendations are made at programmatic, second-tier programmatic review. For impact, remember we have patient advocates at every step of the process who want to hear about how your work will make a difference to patients. This is what I call the so what. In this case, so what does this mean for patients? Innovation, this is it's a criteria in most of our award, but specifically for that IDEA award, it's the main theme of the IDEA award. So provide a clear rationale for these high-risk ideas. For feasibility, make sure you've clearly explained your plan. You have described the team expertise to execute it. So I will give you an example. We had an award, an application with a dietary intervention, and the reviewers noted that no dietitian was listed on the team. They ultimately made a funding recommendation, but with the requirement that a dietitian should be added to the project. And when we brought this up to the PI, we learned she was the registered dietitian and would be fulfilling that role, but it's not been clearly explained in the application. So it's just as likely in an instance like that, reviewers might have decided to make a not fund recommendation based on that missing personnel. So you want to be sure you're covering all of your bases. Demonstrate the availability and access to critical resources, including reagents and drugs, and importantly for this program, again, subject populations. We have that emphasis on service members. Some projects may involve the use of an active duty population that requires special permissions evidenced by a letter of support. I have some supplementary slides with this presentation. I provided our host a copy of my slides as a PDF. They'll distribute those to you so you can look into those slides for more sort of technical details about things like getting permission to use a military population. So next slide. Timelines. The Army has offices for human and animal research. They're going to review what's already been sent through your IRB and Accurate offices. They are not there to repeat that process. But you should still allow 3 to 4 months for review of those documents by our offices. So when you're setting up your timeline, you're setting up your SOW, be sure you're including time for that IRB, or I'm sorry, for our protective offices to review your regulatory documents. Grantsmanship, remember, we have disease advocates at the table. They're reviewing applications, making sure the research will benefit patients. Our patient advocates are well educated in their disease areas, but they are still lay persons, so don't overuse jargon. And be sure you're addressing how your work is going to be beneficial to patients. And we have at grants.gov a verification period. So that third bullet, review application documents carefully before submission. But you also, for 5 days after you've submitted your full application, you can go back and look. You can't change your budget. You can't change your project narrative, but you can see that there are missing letters of support or other documents. That's your opportunity to upload those documents to make sure that your application is complete. And I can't emphasize enough, don't wait till the last minute to submit your application. If something goes wrong with grants.gov in the last 15 minutes of the application time period, you're not going to get an exception. There, it's going to be viewed as you had the entire application period to get your submission in. The only thing that, an act of God, like being in the path of a hurricane that knocks out all your infrastructure for days, that's going to be probably the only sort of acceptable excuse for a late submission. Make sure you have it in on time. Next slide, please. So we have additional information in a webinar series on our CDMRP website. The address is there. I think as long as you get to CDMRP website, you can find it pretty easily. So there's, it looks like 7 additional webinars that you could watch for additional information. So last slide, please. This is all I have for you today, and I'm happy to take questions. And I don't know, did we get any questions in a chat, or maybe we're getting questions?
So far, I have not seen any questions, but maybe we can take a few seconds. So maybe people might be writing some questions.
Yeah, sure, that's fine. I also do this with 20 topic areas. I do this talk a lot. So I have, developed a talk that seems to hit a lot of the questions that I get.
This was extraordinarily helpful, Dr. Huiberts. We'll give it here a minute or two to see if anyone puts a question into the control panel question box or the chat box. I just wanted to, actually, I'll ask a question. When we were talking about the 2 areas that any application must address, so either like a military exposure or something that would affect mission readiness, such as a family member getting cancer, one of the cancers. One of the areas for stomach cancer, and one that we've talked a lot about up on Capitol Hill, is exposure to H. pylori. Would you consider that, like you talk about radiation exposure, would you put exposure to H. pylori in that same sort of exposure category when you're
Yeah, absolutely. So infectious exposures are part of that exposures from deployment.
Great, thank you. And then I know this was a webinar on the peer review cancer research program, and you did mention at the beginning of the presentation that while you couldn't, for example, talk about, a cancer that has metastasized to the breast, because there is a separate program just for breast cancer research. But you said that same restriction didn't apply to the rare cancers, because there is a separate program for rare cancers. Is there anything else that you can say about that? For example, if there is a type of stomach cancer,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is extraordinarily rare. You could also look at the rare cancer research program as a potential opportunity. And can you talk a little bit about how applicants should be careful, like if you're trying to choose between submitting for the peer review cancer research program or the rare cancer research program, what are some of the things that potential applicants would want to consider?
So, yeah, to be clear, so a rare stomach cancer could submit to our program, or they could submit to rare cancers. You can submit to either one. So I think the greatest consideration is to look at the goals of the two programs. The rare cancer program has some very specific goals, initiatives that they're interested in that are different from ours. So you should look at the two and see, which one is offering, has an initiative or is offering a funding mechanism that most closely fits the research that you want to do. And I want to clarify on the metastatic disease. So when you're talking about metastasis, so for example, lung cancer is a prohibited cancer. But if you had, for example, colorectal cancer that metastasized to the lung, what matters is the cancer of origin, right? So you can study metastases in the lung as long as they originate in one of our cancers, but you can't study lung cancer that, would metastasize someplace else, if that makes sense.
Got it. Thank you for that clarification, Julia, and for the added information on the rare cancers. Okay, I don't see any other questions coming through. So we will make this recording, this presentation available, as well as the slides. And we want to thank everyone for your interest, and good luck, and thank you for joining today's presentation.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you so much for your time.